Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to be going over how you can create a custom Salesforce app to take knitting to the next level. My name is Riley, and let's get started. I am a knitter, and if you're watching this, maybe you're a knitter, maybe you're not, maybe you're just looking to kind of see how does one create a custom Salesforce app to take knitting to the next level. Either way, welcome in. But I am a knitter, and that's actually what I've been doing. For the past 4 years, I've actually been a business owner within the knitting community. So I've done pattern designing, tutorials, all those kinds of things. And I saw a need and I decided to take my newfound Salesforce knowledge to create something that can fill that need. So every year, whether it's on January or maybe right before the holidays, a lot of knitters go online and they talk about their resolutions, whether through YouTube, like the knitting YouTubers, or on Instagram. And so these are some of the common knitter resolutions that we see, I want to stash down and use what I already have. Another one that is very common is like, I want to stick to my budget this year. Last year, I feel like my spending was a little bit out of control with my hobby, and I kind of want to bring it back. And then the final one is I want to make progress on my unfinished projects. So a lot of crafters and makers have half-finished projects just sitting around everywhere, and it's really hard to do those when they're not right there in front of you, when you're not seeing them, having a constant reminder that they exist, but you know that they're there, and so it's just like another stressor. So that led to assessing some needs. So if I am going to create a Salesforce app that can help knitters with these resolutions, what do we actually need? First thing we're going to need is to keep track of our stash. Part of that will be assessing the cost and the value of the stash, maximizing the space that we have, need to be more purposeful about our spending. So have some metrics that will help knitters have a visual representation of how their spending has been and how they can make it more purposeful. Like, what do they already have? What do they actually need? What projects have they already planned? And that goes down to keeping track of projects. So you want to utilize the resources you have that you've already purchased for your projects if you're wanting to meet some of these goals. So prioritizing the projects, showing measurable progress on your projects, like how many projects have I finished this year? Like, how many did I start out with and how many do I have now? And I want to be able to link that to the stash to show what exactly is being used from the stash and kind of save time through automation. So automatically take that yarn that I'm using for a project out of my stash, show it as used, and things like that. The first step when creating a Salesforce app, now that we've kind of assessed our needs, is planning. So planning is key to maximizing time and minimizing mistakes. How I started is I started off with a relationship map. I looked at what objects are needed and how do they need to relate to one another. We'll get into my relationship map in the next slide, but then also in the planning, I wrote down a field and report type chart. So I made a table. I wrote down the custom objects in the first column. In the middle column, it was custom fields that I wanted to make for each object. And then the last column was report types. So if I'm tracking projects, I have spinning projects, knitting projects. I don't want all of the same fields to show up every time I do a different project. I want the fields associated to that project type to only show up on those record types and those layouts associated with it. And then finally, I wrote down a list of what do I want to know. If I'm going to create reports and a dashboard to kind of visualize all of the data that I'm collecting, what do I want to know? This helps you keep in mind the end goal, which will further help you develop what custom fields you need, what data you need to be collecting, as well as what automations would be helpful. And then as I'm planning and as I start working on it, I have my notebook off to the side so that if an idea comes like, oh, I didn't think of this in the planning stage, I write it down so that I can incorporate it. All right, so this is kind of what I'm talking about with mapping it out and looking at what we need. So I came to see 4 main objects that I would need to be able to accomplish what I was setting out to do. So the first thing I needed was a stash object. This would be the parent object in the parent-child relationship with stash items. So I also need an object for the items in my stash. And in there, I needed record types and different layouts. And then I also wrote down some fields that I might need for that. And I would need a project object, which would keep track of all of my projects. And I knew that I wanted to automatically add my finished spinning projects into my stash, which I kind of set aside. And I'm like, okay, as I'm setting up the object, I'll keep that in mind, and then we'll come back to that once everything's set up and once we've imported some data to kind of make sure that we can test it and make sure the automation is working. So as I was setting this up, I was thinking, okay, I have projects and I have like yarn, for example. I can use the same yarn for multiple projects, and multiple yarns can be used for one project. So I needed a many-to-many relationship, which is where this project materials object came in. I knew that I needed a junction object to allow multiple stash items to be related to multiple projects. Now that we have all of our stuff mapped out, all of our planning done, let's get into developing. So before I started developing, I kind of wish I had like brought it back to what exactly I wanted to do in which order. So we're actually going to do that here in this video. So the first thing I want to do moving forward is create the profile and Lightning app first. I am newer to this, so if you're more experienced with Salesforce and you have a reason why to not do the profile and Lightning app creation first, please let me know down in the comments because I'm here to learn too. The next thing we're going to do is create objects, fields, layouts, and record types. Then I'm going to create and import records. So for me, I already have a stash. I already have a list of projects. So I entered all of that information into an Excel spreadsheet, and then I uploaded that into my Salesforce instance. And then finally, automations and reports. This is the fun stuff. This is the whole reason I'm doing all of this other stuff, is I want the reports. This is what makes Salesforce more beneficial than just having spreadsheets. This is going to revolutionize the way that I knit and how I manage my resources. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the hands-on stuff. All right, so we're going to go to trailhead.salesforce.com and we're going to log in. If you don't already have a Trailhead account, it's free to get one and it's free to learn. So if you want to get more into Salesforce and learn more about it, I highly recommend using Trailhead. I already have an account, so I'm just going to log in. Here I am on my Trailhead. I have logged in. We're not going to pay attention to any of this stuff in the middle. We're going to go up to your profile in the corner, click it, and go down to hands-on orgs. From here, you're going to create a playground, and here I've created a stash tracking playground. Now, it's automatically going to populate a cute nature animal name, but it's good practice to create a name so you know exactly what this org you were working on. So we're going to launch this one that I've already connected. I haven't used this one yet. When you launch a playground, this is the page you're going to get. It's going to be a welcome page, a welcome video showing you how to get started. We're not going to go over any of that. We're going to dismiss this. And you'll see as we go through, there's lots of pop-ups. It's very helpful. We're starting with creating a profile and Lightning app to put all of this in. So I'm going to head over to Setup, clicking on the gear in the top right corner, and I'm going to go over to Profiles. Now, we don't really, since we're on a playground, we don't really need to set up a profile. However, I'm just going through and doing it to kind of show you, if you're just creating this for yourself so that you can just access it and use it, you don't really need to do this step. I'm just doing it. So we're going to go over here and create a new profile. And we're going to copy it off of a standard user profile. And we're going to call this knitter. And you can add users into it, view users, and then add users. And then we're going to type app in the search bar. And we're going to go to app manager. And we're going to create a new Lightning app. This app name is going to be Stash and Project app. We're actually going to make this a fun purple. Let's do purple. So that's going to be the color, and we're going to use the app's image and colors instead of the org's custom theme in the app. And we're just going to leave all of this. We are going to add, on here, we're going to add reports and dashboards. And as we go, we'll be adding our other objects and pages. So, and then we're going to come down here, system administrator and knitter will be the profiles that can use this app. Then we're going to save and finish. That way we're not bothering the sales team or the marketing team with our knitting, right? We're going to go over here on the top left to object manager. And we're going to start creating our custom objects. If you recall, we had stash, item and stash, project, and project material objects. So we're going to create the parent objects first. We'll start with stash. So we're going to create a custom object. And we're going to label this stash. Stashes. Okay, and then we're going to allow reports. This is the whole reason we're doing this. We want reports. And then we're also going to launch at the very bottom. There's a checkbox, and you're going to click that to launch the new custom tab wizard after saving this custom object. So let's save this. And we're going to search for a tab style. So you can create your own style, but I'm just going to go down, and there is a treasure chest down here. That's going to be what our stash is. Going to hit next. And then we're going to apply a different tab visibility for each profile. So we're going to set the default to off. Actually, we're going to do default to tab hidden. So the difference between off and tab hidden is if it's off, people can still add it, but we don't really need other people to be able to add that, but we do want the knitter to have a default tab and system admin to have it as well. So we're not going to include the tab in all of these. We're only going to include the tab in the Stash and Project app. Awesome. Before we mess around with any of this, I do want to show you kind of when you get to the object page, you have on the left-hand side like fields and relationships, page layouts, record pages, record types, all of that. And we'll get into those in a minute, but we're going to go back to Object Manager and continue creating our objects. So we're going to go to Stash Item. Stash Item. And we're going to start with creating the relationships so that we don't forget to do that as we're going through and creating our custom fields. So we're going to go over to Fields and Relationships, and we want to create a parent-child or a master detail relationship between Stash and Stash Item. So we're going to hit New under Fields and Relationships, and we're going to come down to Master Detail Relationship. We're going to hit Next, and we're going to relate it to Stash. There we go. And next. And then we're going to save that. So we're creating relationships. We'll get into more fields for these different things. So let's go back and let's find our project item. So our craft project material. object. So this object is our junction object. Okay, so if we come back to this page, I don't know if you can see, do you see my cursor? No, you do not see my cursor. Okay, these things, those are showing the relationship. So one line goes to many lines, it meets many lines. So that's how they're related. So a junction object needs to be the child object of the parent objects that you're trying to connect in a many-to-many relationship. And then you always create the relationship on the child object. So you assign the parent to the child, basically. Oh, you can't see my cursor. Never mind. So we created the relationship on the item stash or the stash item, and now we need to create two relationships on project materials to item and stash and one to project. And so we're going to go over to fields and relationships and new. So this will be a master detail relationship. And this is related to stash item. Again, we're just going to skip over that permission stuff. And we're going to save in new. And we're going to create another master detail relationship. And we're going to assign this to the craft project. Next, 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 and save. Okay, so now we've created all of our relationships. Let's go back and look at the different fields. So referencing our list, let's start with the ones that need the least amount of fields. I'm going to create a new field, and it's going to be a number. And this is going to be yards used. And we're going to have that be 5 digits. For ease, we're going to focus on using integers in this app as opposed to like whole numbers, because I do not need a data point that's so specific to every like 10th or 100th or anything like that. So we're just going to keep it in the integer range. We'll just hit next and save in new. And then we're going to do another number, and we're going to do grams used. And we'll allow that to be 5 digits long as well. Next, next, save. And that is all that we need on the craft project material object. So now we'll go back to Object Manager. We'll check those off of our list, and we're going to go over to stash. Now, I want my stash to count how many items are in it. So I'm going to create a new field, and it's going to be a roll-up summary field. So this is a read-only field that displays the sum, minimum, or maximum value of a field in a related list, or the record count of all records in a related list. So you can only really do roll-up summaries on specific object relationships, and master detail is one of them. So this is going to be, we're going to call this number of items in stash. And we're going to summarize stash items, and we're just going to count them. So all records are going to be included in this calculation. So we're going to create this, and then we're going to come back and edit this to show criteria. Because right now I'm thinking, yes, I want to count it all. But then as I do projects, I'm going to realize, wait, I don't want it to count stuff in my stash if I've used it. So we'll come back to this. We'll save this and we'll come back and edit this. See, it's a constant learning process. It's a constant like, oh, you know, this would actually work better. Okay, so now we're gonna go back. We're gonna go to the ones with the most fields. Okay, so let's go over to stash item. I am actually going to show you a couple of them, a couple of the different field types that haven't been entered in, and then I'm gonna just like cut out a bunch of this in editing because you don't need to see me going through and creating all of these fields. Let's get to it. Okay, all right. Let's start with a new field. So I want to know different things about the item and stash. So the first thing is what stash it's a part of, which will tell me if it's a yarn, fiber, or fabric, which we already have by relating it to the stash object. So don't need to worry about that one. That one's already done when we created our relationship. The next thing I want to do is I want to know if I have plans for this or if I just bought it. So I'm going to do a true false statement, which will end up being a checkbox. And I'm going to do, are there plans for this item? And we're going to have the default as unchecked. Then we're going to hit next, next, save and new. Okay, cross that one off my list. Next thing I want to do is I want to know what are the plans. So I'm going to put a text area long. I'm actually going to do text area rich because maybe I want to link to a pattern that I plan on using. So since I want links, I'm going to do a text area rich. We're going to call this plans. So these are what my plans are. Shows visible line, description, help text. So link to patterns or give a 1 to 2 sentence description of plans. So the help text is what, if you've ever been on a website and there's like an I, like an information thing that you hover over and it kind of tells you what that is all about, that's what the help text is. It fills in that text box. So we're going to go save and new. The next few are going to be pick lists, and I want these pick lists to be available both on stash item and project page. First, I want to create a global pick list since I know this pick list is going to appear in more than one object. So I'm going to go back to home and I'm going to search pick list and I'm going to go to pick list value sets. So I'm going to create a new value set and I'm going to call this one color family. Okay, so we have, let's go over the rainbow, Roy J. Biv, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and pink. And then we'll do white, gray, black, brown, golden, and natural, and then multicolored. Since we're here, instead of having to come back, I'm just going to create multiple global pick list value sets that I'm going to need. So I needed the color family one, and I need a fiber content one, and a yarn weight one. We're going to go back to Object Manager, and we're going to go back to item and stash, or stash item. And now we're going to create our pick list fields. So we're going to go down to pick list, going to hit next, and we're going to do color family. I didn't do a multi-select one for color family. Let's find the color family global pick list from the dropdown. There we go. And in the help text, I'm going to write pick the color that is most dominant. Okay. And then we're going to hit, because, you know, some fabrics are going to be patterned and things like that, but, you know, there's pink patterned fabrics and, you know, the color that stands out the most is what we're going to have, what we're going to pick. And we're just going to skip over all of this and we're going to do save and new. Okay. Now we're going to do another pick list. Okay, a really important data point if we're looking at trying to figure out how much I've spent this year or this month, or what did I buy this year or this month, all of that, we're going to need a date. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a date data type. We're going to do the date added to stash. Okay, and then we're going to go next. We're not going to require it because sometimes you don't remember, and so you'll come back and add a date later. Okay, another thing that we're going to need to know is we're going to know cost. So we're going to need a currency data type, like how much did it cost? So cost slash value. We're going to do cost slash value because maybe you didn't spend money on it, but to know what this is, you always fill it out to know the value. Write the cost or value of this stash item. And we're going to do save and new. Now, how do we separate like how much our stash is valued for and how much we actually spent on it? Because a lot of times we get gifts, we get hand-me-downs, things like that. So we're going to do another checkbox to help separate the two. We're going to call this gift, and we're going to have the default be unchecked. And then in the help text, we're going to say check this box if you didn't spend, if you obtained this item at no cost. All right, so we're gonna go next, next, save and new. Now we need another number because we want to know the weight in grams. So I'm gonna have this, again, just be integer, and we're gonna have a default value. So the reason why I'm having a default value is because in future automations, I want to automate it so that if the stash item's current weight or current yardage gets under a certain number, I want it to automatically mark this item status as used. So I am, for weight and yardage, setting default values that you can go back and change. So the default value for this is going to be 113 grams because a lot of times you buy fiber in 4-ounce bundles here in the US, and so that's about 113 grams. So that's what the default value will be. So we're going to hit next, next, save and new. Okay, so speaking of yardage, let's do that. Another number. Let's do yardage. Okay, next, next, save and new. We're going to create roll-up summary. So remember how we created the junction object project material so that multiple projects could use the same stash item. So if we want to know how much total has been used from this stash item, we're going to need to do a roll-up summary which summarizes that from the project material object. So we're going to do amount used. Amount used. And we're going to summarize craft project materials, and we're going to sum yards used. Actually, we need to change this to yards used because we need to track yards and grams. So yards used, sum all of the yards used that are connected to this record. So gonna hit next, next, save and new. And we're gonna do the same thing for grams. These next two fields are going to be formula fields. So now we're gonna calculate how much is left. So yards left and we want this to come out as a number. And we don't need it to go to decimal places because we're using integers for yards, as we've established. So we want to do yardage minus yards used. And we're going to check our syntax down at the left bottom. Down on the bottom at the left, we're going to check our syntax. And then we're going to hit next, next, save and new. Final one, another formula. We're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it for grams this time. So, okay, so these are all of our fields that we have created for our stash item. Once you get the fields, we're going to look at page layouts. So as you can see, like I was saying, yardage isn't useful for fiber. Grams isn't really useful for fabric. So when we're going through and we're putting information into these records, there's just going to be a lot of everything. So we're going to create different page layouts for the different crafts. So we're going to do new, and we're going to clone it off of the stash item layout. We're going to call this yarn layout, and we're going to hit save. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff here we don't need, so I'm going to edit all of these, and you click it and you drag it up to this box up here at the top, and that's how you remove it from the layout. So I don't need any of these. Don't need that. Don't need that. And then the same thing for here. We don't need any of these, so I'm going to get that. Actually, we are going to keep delete and edit on this action bar, but we don't need to access any of these other things because they have nothing to do with our crafting, and we want to just focus on our crafting, don't we? Okay, so we don't need to submit it for approval. We don't need a printable view. Okay, just need edit and delete. Now I'm going to create another section. So up here in the box, there's a yellow rectangle that has section written on it. And I'm going to click and drag this down right above the system information section. And I'm going to drop it there. I'm going to call this plans. Okay. We don't really need these, so I'm going to hit the minus button for remove when I hover over these fields. We don't need to see these on the layout. And we're going to remove standard buttons that we're not going to be using because we don't need the clutter. We don't need the confusion. Down right here, we have plans, and this is like going to be more text. So I'm going to put it in its own section. Let's put some of these numbers over here. Let's put the status at the top over here. Let's do cost and value over here if we want to destash. Was it a gift? So you kind of organize it the way that you want to. As you can see, you just click and drag and move things around. So we're going to come over here up at the left in this big box at the top, and we're going to hit save. Now we're going to do a new one, and we're going to clone it off of the yarn layout, and we're going to call this fiber. And we're going to hit save. Okay. So fiber does not have a yarn weight, so we're going to remove that. It doesn't have a spin type, and it doesn't have plies, and it doesn't have yardage, so we don't need any of the yardage stuff. All right, and here we are. All of the stuff we need to know for fiber. So we're going to save this and then create our fabric layout. So we're going to clone this off of fiber or yarn, either one, and we're going to call this fabric. And hit save. So fabric, we don't need to know the weight or the grams used or the grams left, but we do need to know some things that aren't on here. So if I go over to fields up here, we have some of the fields that we've taken off. So we do need yardage for fabric. We need yardage. And we do want how many yards are left, how many yards are used. And that is all we need here. So we're going to save this. So these create the page layouts, but creating page layouts doesn't mean it's going to show up in your application and that you're going to be able to use those page layouts. How you do that is you do record types. So the reason why you would do record types instead of just assigning page layouts to profiles is you can only assign one page layout to a profile unless you have record types. So record types is how you're able to have multiple layout options to choose from for a record for the same user. So that's where the record type is coming in this instance. So we're going to create a new one. And this record type is going to be yarn. And we're just going to leave these security settings as is. It doesn't matter, but you can change that. Now, we're going to select the page layout from one of the ones we've created for this record type. So this record type is yarn, so we're going to use the yarn layout. And we're going to save and new. We're going to make it active and we'll make it available. And you can also set which record type will be the default. I just want people to be able to choose. So here's fiber, save and new, and we'll create one last record type for fabric. Let's see what this looks like on our app. Hit App Launcher or click on it, and then we're going to go down to View All. And over here at the bottom we have Stash and Project App. I actually want this to not be over here for sake of ease. I want it to be at the top of my list, so I'm going to click on these dots on the right hand side, and I'm going to click and drag it to the top because I want that to be at the top. That's what I'm working with. So every time I hit that app choosing button, that'll be at the top. So up here we see all of the tabs that we created and we added to this application. So we have our reports, our dashboards, our stashes, our stash items, our materials, and our projects. So I'm going to go over to stash items and I'm going to create a new stash item. So now we can choose our record type. So let's say I want to create a yarn. So this yarn is called yellow yarn. And it was $21. It goes in my yarn stash. Oh, we're going to create a new stash because we actually haven't created our stashes. So you can actually create a new stash from this page. So let's create new stash. And the stash name is going to be yarn stash. And we're going to hit save. So now it is in yarn stash. I don't have plans for this item. It wasn't a gift. I purchased it from Blue Store. Ironic. And I did that on Wednesday. And it's of course in the yellow family. And it's cotton. Okay, status, it's just sitting at the moment. Yarn weight. It's a worsted weight yarn. Worsted spun. 3 plies. 100 grams. And I don't know. 200 yards. Since I don't have plans, I'm not going to fill this out. And then I'm actually going to hit save and new so that you can see if I go over to fiber, I have different things. I don't have to fill out any of the yardage or the spin type or the ply type. It's all good. So here is my page for a stash item. This is my record page. Before we can do anything, we need to add more data because that's how we're really going to visualize how our app is functioning. Now we're going to import some data into our Salesforce instance. We're just going to focus on stash items. Just know you can do the exact same thing for your craft project object and importing records and all this. Everything we're doing with the stash items, you can do with that. I feel like if I do both of them, it's kind of redundant and a waste of both of our times. So we're going to go ahead and just focus on stash items and creating reports and stuff from there. So if we go over to Setup, click on that. It's the gear in the top right corner. And we come over here to Quick Find. We're going to go to Import Wizard. Data Import Wizard. So I'm sure you don't have over 50,000 records to import from your stash at this time. If you do have over 50,000, you can either do it in 50,000 record batches or can get Data Loader and use that. So it's kind of an in-between. It's not built into Salesforce, but it can connect you and get your records into Salesforce. But you probably don't need to know that at this moment. So we're going to launch our wizard. So I've already gone through, I have a spreadsheet, I have all of this information. If you don't already have a spreadsheet and you want to create a spreadsheet so that you can get your data into your Salesforce instance more efficiently, and so you start at a spreadsheet and then you import for the stuff you already have, I would go through and at the top for the names of the columns, I would do all of the field labels exactly as you've written them in your Salesforce instance. That way you get all the data you need right up front. I don't have the exact same labels, and we're going to show you what Salesforce does with that. So I want to import a custom object stash item. I want to add new records, and it's going to come from, it's going to be the yarn record type. So I split it into different spreadsheets, one for yarn, one for fabric, and one for fiber. We're just going to focus on yarn and fiber right now. And we're going to drag a file there to upload. So I am going to bring in my yarn stash, and I've saved that Excel spreadsheet as a CSV file. So you need to have it as a CSV file. So comma separated values, that's the file format that the import wizard is going to recognize and use. So some of my field labels don't match up what I have in my Salesforce instance. So let's map those. So if I click on map, stash name is stash, and we're going to map that. Color is going to be color family. Going to map that. Cost is going to be cost/value, and we're going to map that. Spin is going to be spin type. And want to destash is going to be destash ? So I have now mapped all of my fields. So I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to start my import. Click OK, and down here we'll see we had 27 records processed and 0 failed. So good job us. Now we're going to import my other spreadsheet, which is for my fiber stash. So we're going to come to custom objects, stash items, add new records. We're going to do it based off of stash name. It's going to be a fiber record type. Make sure you click the correct record type or you're going to lose some data. And we're going to drag that CSV file that I've saved over here. So now we're going to edit mapping. So we're going to map things that aren't mapped correctly. Now, some of these, we have plies in our CSV, but we don't have any information under there. We have spin there. We do have want to destash. So like, we don't have any data in these columns of our spreadsheet, so it's okay if we don't map those. There's not really a field in this record type to map it to because we don't need that data, so it's okay if that data is lost because it's not actually there. So all of those are good. We have 4 unmapped fields. That's to be expected. We're going to start our import. And let's see, all of our records processed. So now if we come back over to our stash and projects, let's go to stash items. And we're going to go to all. And here we are. Here is all of the stash that we just imported. Now, something really cool is if we go over to stashes and we go over to fiber stash and we go to related, these are all of the items in our stash that we've put and related to the fiber stash record. So it's pretty cool. You can kind of see all of the things, details. Look, how many numbers of items in our stash? 13. So that's pretty cool. Which reminds me, we actually did not go back and fix that in our stash object. So let's go back. We're going to go to Object Manager and we're going to look for our stash. So if you recall, I was saying when creating this number of items in stash and we did a count, there should be some criteria for that. So we're going to add the criteria. So we're going to do only records where the status does not equal used, because we only want to count things that aren't used. If it's used, it's technically not in our stash anymore. So I'm going to hit save. So if we come over here, right now the number of items in our stash is 13. If I go over to my stash items and I pick something that has one of my fibers, so let's do this. And if I change the status to used, and I save that, and I go back over to my fiber stash, now we see that there are only 12 items in our stash. Pretty cool, huh? Now we've created and imported some records for data, and now we're at my favorite and the most exciting part for me, which is the automations and the reports. I'm going to go over reports with you, and then instead of going over the whole process of like the automations, because some of the automations that we wanted, right, was to, as soon as we finished a spinning project, immediately add that to stash. So I'm actually going to show you that in my dev org where I've already finished this application, and then we can I'll show that to you there, all the automations there. But let's start with reports because this is exciting stuff. So we're going to create a new folder to begin with, and we're going to create a stash report folder. We're going to start off strong with some organization. Okay, and we're going to create a new report. So looking at a list that I've made about what do I want to know, some of the things I want to know is that I want to know what has been in my stash the longest. So we're going to do stashes with stash items report. And that is, I found that under other reports. Custom object reports will be under other reports. You can also create custom reports. We don't really need that for the reports that we're going to be creating, so we're going to leave this as is. So on this, I'm going to organize it by which stash it's in. So, and I'm going to update my preview automatically. That's off to the right. It's a toggle button. I'm going to have my stash item, the date that it was added, and I also want to know if I have plans for this. Actually, for this report, we don't really need to create a summary report, which is where you have a grouped row. But I'm going to organize this because I want to know what's been in my stash the longest, right? So I'm adding it from oldest to newest, so I'll be able to see. If you don't have a date listed, Salesforce will count that as the oldest. This is all I need to know for this report. I just need to know what's been in my stash the longest. So we're going to save and run this report, and we're going to name this longest in stash. Now, something we could do is we could say what's been in my fiber stash the longest, what's been in my yarn stash the longest. So here we are. Let me just show you. We're not going to create separate reports because, again, being efficient with our time. But I'll show you how you can do that. So if I go over to filters, I'm going to add the filter of the stash name. And if the stash name equals fiber stash, I want to see those. So now we see how the list has changed. I'm only seeing items from my fiber stash now. And so from here, I could create a different report. So I could actually save as a new one, and I could do longest fiber in stash. And then I'm going to save this to my stash reports, which I actually didn't do for the other one, which is an oopsie. And you can do the same thing for yarn and fabric. Okay, let's see. Let's do another report. Let's do another one because this is a lot of fun. Okay, we're going to do, again, it's going to be a stashes with stash items one. I want to know how much money have I spent on yarn and fiber this year. So we're going to add a column of cost/value. We're going to add the column of gift. Let's summarize it by stash name. Oh, that's not what I meant. Stash name. Okay, so we're going to actually group our rows by stash name. So now we can see the allocation of our funds. We can see that my fiber stash is worth, not necessarily that I spent, because see over here in the gift, there's some that are unchecked. There's some that are checked. So those costs shouldn't be in the subtotal. That's just how much that's valued. So we're going to go over to filters, and we're going to add the filter of gift. And we only want it to show if it's false. We only want that to be recorded if it's false. So now you can see my spending doesn't look as big as it did before, but that's just total for the whole stash. So again, we need another filter. We need to do the date added to stash and the range to be this current calendar year. So now we see how much I've spent on fiber, how much I've spent on yarn this year. And to show you even further, I'm going to put the date added to stash in there as well so that you can see we're only looking at 2022 records. If I change this, we can see we have some 2021, 2019. So we're going to go back to the current calendar year. So we're going to save and run this one. Money spent on stash this year. Because it's going to update with the calendar year, I'm not going to leave it with 2022, and we're going to put this in our stash reports folder and save. There's so many other reports that we can run, but that's kind of the gist of how you run a report. So now we're going to go over to dashboards, and we're going to create a new folder, and this is going to be stash dashboards. And we're going to save that. And we're going to do a new dashboard, and we're going to call this dashboard Stash at a Glance. And we're going to put it in our Stash Dashboards folder, and we're going to create. This is really cool. This is like where we're getting into like Salesforce as a whole, like how it benefits companies and small businesses so much. It's these reports and dashboards and like being able to visualize these metrics and have them updated. Like there's so many great things about Salesforce, but this is really, really helpful for so many things. Like it's so helpful to getting organized with my stash. So we're going to add a component, and we're going to select the report, and we're going to do longest in stash and select that. We're going to we're going to allow 5 things to be displayed, and we're going to sort it by date added to the stash, and it's already where it needs to be at, so we're going to add that. And then we're going to add another component, and it's going to be over here, money spent on stash this year. That's the report that we're going to be taking this from. And I'm going to do a metric chart, so it just shows me this. Say that my budget that I gave myself, so say at the beginning, I was like, I want to spend less on stash this year. I only want to spend $300. Let's say $300. I only want to spend $300 on building my stash this year. So you have to have the bigger number on the bottom, apparently. I'm learning. And the smaller at the top. Now, these colors are kind of confusing because we don't want it to be down here. We don't want it to be red and like warning if we're under budget. We want it to be red and warning if we're over budget. So we're going to change this color to red. And this color to green. And we're not going to do it at the halfway point. We're not going to have it change to yellow at the halfway point. We're going to have it change to yellow when we're like at $200. Okay, so right now we're still in green. We're still doing okay. If we go over 200, it's like, okay, you're going to have to start slowing down because you only have $100 left. And then if we hit over 300, it's like, you're over the budget you gave yourself. That's a way you can use this to visualize on the dashboard. And then we can add this. From here, you can adjust the size of things, all of that. This looks good. We're going to hit save and done. So now this is what the dashboard looks like. Now that we have all of this, let's work on making our app look really nice. Like when I open my Stash and Project app, so if I click on this, this is the first thing I see. This isn't the first thing that I want to see when I open up my app. When I open up my app, I want to see the information that I'm coming here for. I want to see what's in my stash, what's been in my stash the longest, and how much have I spent. So let's go back to setup. So click the gear in the corner, setup. And we're going to go over here to Lightning App Builder. So under User Interface, Lightning App Builder from the search bar. And we're going to create a new one. And we're going to call this one, we're going to make it be an app page. And we're going to call this one Stash at a Glance. We're just going to call it the same thing that we called our dashboard. It's fine. We only need one region because we just want to put our dashboard on it. And over on the left, you have components that you can click and drag into the center to add to your page. So I'm just going to add dashboard. Now off on the right, I can choose which dashboard's there. Already automatically, it's my only dashboard. I have Stash at a Glance. There we go. And that's all we're going to do. We're going to save, and then we're going to activate it. So now, under activation, let's change this to Stash at a Glance. What do we want? Let's see. Is there a money sack here? Okay, let's do a box. Here we go. We got Stash at a Glance right here. We're going to go to Lightning Experience, and we're going to choose the app that we're putting this page on, which we're going to put on our Stash and Project app. So we're going to add our page to our app. I want this to be at the top. I want it to be the first thing I see. We're going to save this. So now, come back here. Let's come back to the Stash and Project app. Ignore the second tab, but here we are. Now, the first thing I see when I open up my app is, here's what's been in your stash the longest. Here's how much money you've spent on it. Pretty cool, right? Okay, so now I'm going to come to my dev org, and I'm going to show you some automations. So as you can see, I've changed the theme on my dev org. If you go, since it's very obvious and because it's something that I was curious about when I saw somebody else's looking a bit different, if you come over here in setup, you go search for theme, and you just go user interface, themes and branding, and you can create a new theme right here, which is what I did. So now my app is actually called Hobby. That's what I called it on this org when I was making it. So now you can see I have my projects at a glance here. This is a dashboard that I created with my project data. This is how many yards of yarn I've spun this year, how many projects I've finished this year, what projects finished separated by type, what's on my queue, what I'm currently working on. What I'm really here to show you is I'm here to talk about the automations. If I'm doing a spinning project, so right here I have a spinning project. If I edit it and I mark it as finished, I want it to add this project with all this information and convert it into yarn in my stash. Let me show you how I did that. Again, setup in the top right corner. And we're going to search in the quick find box, we're going to go to Process Builder. For the automations that I have been doing, I used Process Builder because they were just one-step automations. We're going to add handspun to stash. This is the process. I'm going to clone this so that I can go through and add the thing that I forgot to add. Okay, so at the very start, I added the object. So I want it to be done when it's created or edited. So if I go through and I edit it to be finished, I want it to create the yarns. Then this is the criteria. The handspun project is finished and hasn't already been added to stash. So this was an issue I ran in when I first did the automation, was I didn't add a criteria barring it from being duplicated. So that I had to come through and do that. So criteria, conditions are met, all of these. So the project type must be spinning. So if it's not a spinning project, don't do it. The status needs to be finished, and the handspun added to stash needs to not be true. So I added a checkbox onto my project page that was handspun added to stash, and the default is unchecked. So that was the criteria. Then the actions that it will take is it's going to immediately create a stash item record. So it's going to do the record item and stash. I have the stash ID, which I got from the URL link. And then I have all of these field values that are in my stash item that I'm taking from my project record and porting over. So if I want to do date added to stash, we're going to do a field reference, and we're actually going to do the finished date. So finished on. And that will be the date that it's added to stash. And we're going to save this. And we're going to activate it. And we're going to make this the active version and not the other one. So now we're going to come back and we're going to test it on this project. And as you can see over here, I've added related materials list. You can do all of this actually really quick before we test it. I just want to show you. If you come to the gear and you go to edit page, it will pull up the Lightning App Builder, and you can move around the different components and customize your pages, which is something we didn't do in the one that we were working on, but it's something that you can do, and I just wanted to let you know about that. Okay, so let's test our automation. That's what we're here to do. From here, I'm going to edit it. I'm going to say that I finished it on July 2nd. That's actually my goal. My goal is to finish it by tomorrow. The yarn weight is going to be fingering. It's going to be worsted spun, and let's say it's finished. So now we're going to hit save. We're going to go over to items and stash, and under recent items and stash should be what was just added. So this is the Christmas Sock Spin 2022 handspun. And look at this. Here it is. This is our stash item. Look at it. Isn't it glorious? So it automatically created this entry for me in my stash. So I don't have to go through and manually enter it again, which this is really, really helpful for hand spinners who also are knitters or crocheters or weavers. I'm kind of a nerd about this, and I really like it. Some of the other automations, just to kind of show you some of the other processes. So right here, I have change stash item status. So if a project material is using a stash item, we need to update the stash item that it's connected to status to using. So we didn't need any criteria for this because there isn't any criteria other than it being created, which is what we established right here. And then this other one, and this is why I went through and set default values for the yardage and the grams, changing stash item status to used. So this changes our stash item status once things are below a certain point. Whenever a record is created or edited and it's under 10 yards or equal to 0 grams, then you're going to go through and change the status of the item and stash record to used. So yeah, that's basically the gist of it. I know I've been sitting here talking your ear off. If you've made it this far in the video, thanks for hanging out. If not, that's cool too. The last thing is it's just going to be continued improvement. Like, you know, things are never really finished. There's always ways that it can be improved. As I've used the custom application, just in the few days that I've had it since I've started and finished it, it's been made evident to me different gaps or data that I forgot to collect, or things that I'm like, oh, I didn't think about this when I was planning, but I do want to know this. Using the application will help show you what gaps need to be filled. It's all about lifelong learning. As I expand my skills, as you expand your skills, we'll be able to find things that we could improve further as well. Like I've been asking this whole time, if you're watching this video and you're a Salesforce user and there are things that you think, oh, if she only knew this, she could make it better in this way, please let me know in the comments. I have access to Trailhead. I can definitely, like, if you say something like, hey, learn this and this will help with this, I will definitely go out and do that. The last part is community. That provides valuable feedback. It's great to have users. That's all. Thank you so much for being here. I'm a nerd, I'm a knitter, and see you next time.